For the latest analysis on the situation, I'm joined by Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under the Obama administration. Joel, so let's start with this. We've heard from Trump that time here is running out. He said the armada is on its way, another one, but there's still hopes for negotiations. What's your assessment of the situation of where we're at right now?
Well, Catalina, it's great to be with you. And President Trump clearly wants to make a show of force, not just towards Iran, but he has done this, of course, in our own hemisphere towards Venezuela. And he has had success at pinpoint military strikes in Venezuela in particular, and then against Iran in the strikes back in June. But what we're looking at right now is much different because he has tied this military pressure to the protests on the ground in the street. And there's no clear path to achieving a goal of regime change, which seems to be undergirding what he wants through military strikes from outside alone. And so it's very unclear what he's trying to achieve right now. He has talked about the nuclear program, but we don't quite have a sense of the specificity of what his policy is. And that's creating concern in Washington that it really is a policy without direction.
You're taking us exactly to our next question, Joel, because what are we talking about if negotiations were to take place here? What do you think Donald Trump is asking for, what he's really after?
You know, Catalina, I'm a big advocate for nuclear negotiations. I always have been. I also did support the strikes back in June, as I believed that at the time there was an imminent threat of a move towards weaponization. But right now we're in a different period. Right now, in early 2026, we need to have a clear path towards ensuring that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon, but that also we have a policy towards Iran that does not create greater instability in the region. And that's my big fear, is that our allies in the region, be it Saudi Arabia or UAE, they are very nervous about military strikes without clarity. What could happen to refugee flows if the regime perhaps is hit and there's no power to come in and really fill that vacuum? Could there be refugees into Turkey? There's a lot of unknown questions. And so this is a policy that seems to be driven more by President Trump's personal sense of animus and his personal sense of power rather than a clarity with our allies as to what we're trying to achieve.
Right. And despite all of this buildup that we're seeing here, all of these warships that he's sending, this pressure, saying that he will hit harder than ever before than last year, do you think that there can be realistically a chance of de-escalation between the U.S. and Iran?
You know, first of all, the bravado that you reference, the idea that somehow we are just going to this time get it right, whereas the last time when we conducted strikes and the Israelis conducted strikes, many regime leaders, many nuclear scientists, IRGC leaders were killed, and we'd have to do that again. I mean, this is, again, what I refer to as bravado. What's the intention? If the intention is to get a nuclear agreement with Iran, that is a worthy objective. But where are the negotiations? And currently, they're not underway. And so I think what we're looking at for President Trump is a desire to try to increase military pressure and threats without clarity about how to achieve the specific objective of ensuring that there is no nuclear program functioning and moving towards a bomb in Iran. And that's why you hear it in my tone. There's uncertainty in Washington. I talk to a lot of people in Washington across both sides of the aisle, trying to understand where the policy is heading. And the reality is that nobody really understands it. And it's a lot of emotion, and it's not a lot of clarity about what we're trying to achieve right now towards Iran.
Exactly. And Joel, I think you can agree here that this is probably striking and also unprecedented language coming from a U.S. president talking so openly and vividly about military deployment. So how unusual is that? And what effect does this kind of rhetoric have in the situation that is already so tense, especially as you say, since no one really understands what the policy is here?
Yeah, Catalina, I'm glad you brought this up. We're in a moment of post-legal military activity by the Trump administration, where historically, and according to our Constitution and according to laws passed by Congress, the president should seek authorization for strikes. We call it an authorization for the use of military force, or he should be providing an explanation under the War Powers Act as to why he took strikes related to Venezuela, for example, related to ISIS and others. Now, on the strikes against ISIS in Syria, there are those guidelines, there are those legal justifications, but there aren't any towards Iran. And in fact, Congress has passed legislation saying there is no authorization for force against Iran. And so for the president, if he wants to make sure the American people are on board with any military action abroad, he needs to come to Congress, but he chose not to towards Venezuela. And now it looks as if he's doing the same towards Iran. And that is not a popular position to take.
Right. And Iran also recently said that it made no requests for negotiation right now, especially with U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff. So this raises a big question, right? So what leverage does Washington actually have in this moment, considering that they made no requests for negotiation and beyond moving military assets into the region?
Well, I have to say, for the Iranians to put it on the other direction, they should walk very carefully, because as we have seen, President Trump is not hesitant to use military force. And I don't think he would hesitate to use it here, regardless of what we were talking about earlier, to use it again towards Iran. They're really playing with fire if they think that somehow he's just going to turn back. And so this is a moment for the Iranian leadership as well to recognize that there is pressure against them. Clearly, the sanctions, the economic distress in the country is paramount. Of course, the military pressure we're discussing. And on the ground, inside Iran, the people, the mass slaughter of Iranian civilians by this regime is unprecedented. And they are feeling the heat both internally and externally. If they were interested in maintaining their power and not getting to another war, it would behoove them to reach out to Steve Witkoff with a legitimate negotiation to try to find a way forward. If they don't think that the president will take strikes, they're really making a very risky, dangerous bet that has been proven to be the opposite outcome from what they're expecting in the past.
And we've been talking about military policy here because you've brought up this good question. So what is the larger U.S. military policy when it comes with what we've been seeing also with Venezuela and now Iran? What's your assessment on Trump's actions? Are they erratic, or does he have a point here?
Well, the interesting part about this is that the Iran situation is a bit out of the frame of where this administration is trying to drive national security policy for the United States. A recent national security strategy that we published, that the president's team published a couple of months ago, essentially said it wants to have the United States dominate hegemonically the Western Hemisphere and allow spheres of influence, be it from Russia in Europe, be it from China and Asia, allow that to unfold. But Iran is different. Iran is not in our region. But from my perspective, Iran is very personal for President Trump. He views Iran and the Iranian leadership as at one time attempting to assassinate him. He has taken strikes against the leaders of the IRGC and against the nuclear program. He's a strong supporter of Israel. And I think that this president looks at Iran as a special case where his military policy and national security strategy that is global, Iran stands out as a target for him. And I think the Iranian leadership needs to recognize that he's not going to just walk away from this.
And finally, Joel, for countries across the region, you mentioned also escalation in the region, watching all of this play out. How worried should U.S. allies be about confrontation spiraling here into something bigger?
I think they should be worried. I think that what we're on a path. There was a conjecture, a discussion about maybe a week ago, there would be strikes, and apparently we were not ready was the argument as to why we did not. But when we move forces into theater, like we did towards Venezuela, they sit there. And they sat in Venezuela for months. And I remember when I served at the State Department, we moved forces into Kuwait, and they sat there for months before invading Iraq in 2003. And so when we put forces into the Gulf and towards Iran and they sit there, you can bet that the direction is towards military action, and the region needs to take this seriously.
Joel Rubin, thank you so much for your analysis on this developing situation. Joel Rubin joining us from Chile, Washington, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under the Obama administration.